Hello students, welcome to Scholar, your one-stop solution for IAS preparation. I am Anubhav Sharma and I am your faculty for Indian Polity. Let's get on with our module for today. So students, in this module we will be studying about Historical Revolution Part 3. In our previous two modules we have already covered some important aspects of Historical Revolution that eventually led to formation of Indian Constitution. I have already told you that some of these parts will actually be dealt in detail in the modern history modules, but here the idea was that we are able to cover at least those important British Act which has played a big role in how we see our constitution today. Keeping that in mind, let's get on with our module. So students, the act that we will be studying today first is Government of India Act of 1919. So we have studied about Monte Mirlo reforms that had happened in 1909. Now we will be studying about the next important set of reforms that came about, and that was Government of India Act 1980. So what exactly was this all about? Let's try to understand it one by one. So the first thing that we need to understand is that essentially GOI Act 1919, what it did was to further expand the participation of Indians in Government of India. It was realized that it is necessary that Indians are being a part of the administration. At least they should be given that confidence, they should be given that sense of power as to what all they think matters with respect to decisions that British India authorities are taking. Much like 1909, that is Government of India 1909, which was called Morley-Minto Reform. Why? Because Lord Morley was the Secretary of State, while Lord Minto was the Viceroy or the Governor General of India. Here too, the same happened. Government of India Act 1980 is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. Why? Because Edwin Montagu was the Secretary of State for India, while Lord Chelmsford was the Viceroy and Governor General of India. As such, the names Montagu and Chelmsford were taken, and thus it is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms or simply Montfort Reforms. Again, an important point which you need to keep in mind because this question has actually been asked in Prelims examination. Right? The most notable feature of the Act was end of benevolent despotism and introduction of responsible government in India. What exactly do we mean by responsible government? Essentially, it means is that a government who is accountable for the decisions that it takes, who is answerable to the questions that is being asked by the councillors for the decisions and policy decisions on policy matters what it has taken. We will understand about this in detail in the course of this lecture. Another important point to note here is that this act was meant to cover the period of 10 years, that is 1919 to 1929. In fact, you must have studied about this in your medieval history module, in your modern history module, that in 1927 Simon Commission had come. Why exactly had Simon Commission come? To actually look into the Government of India 1919 Act and then suggest those reforms which was in line with what was written in Government of India Act 1919. What exactly am I trying to say? That Government of India Act 1919 said that this act will cover next 10 years. As such, after next 10 years, it needs to be reformed. What exactly was the commission who was given the responsibility of looking into the reforms that Government of India Act 1919 required? It was the Simon Commission which came in India in 1927. I hope this point again is clear. Now, let's try to understand some of the most important features of Government of India Act. So the first important feature is that the Government of India Act, that is 1919 Act, had a separate preamble. So we know that in our present day constitution also there is a preamble. We know after a lot of deliberation and after discussion, Supreme Court has accepted that preamble makes the basic structure of Indian Constitution. It is very much a part of Indian Constitution for the reason it explains us the goals that we seek to achieve. Be that as it may, what I am trying to tell you here is that Government of India Act 1919 also had a preamble, and that is where one can argue that Indian constitution makers also decided to have a preamble for Indian constitution that got made after 1947. I hope this point is clear. So what all were the key points of preamble? The first was that India would remain an integral part of British Empire. That is, all these talks about India getting independent, all these talks about the extremists in Congress, or for that matter, the revolutionary activists, all of them were trying to kind of push for Poon Swaraj. They wanted India to be liberated from their colonial masters, that is Britishers. So the first thing which Government of India in 1919 did was to make it clear that Britishers do not have any intent to leave India. The British, the Crown, do not see in any foreseeable future that they will be leaving India to the hands of Indians. So India would remain an integral part of British Empire. Secondly, gradual decentralization of authority will happen. Now, students, we have studied about this in detail. That 1858 Act was an act which essentially centralized the powers of the British India into the hands of Governor General and, of course, into the hands of Secretary of State. This centralized nature of power continued for a very long time, and it was in 1919 it was realized by the Britishers that they at least would need to take those efforts by which they are able to decentralize authority. Why exactly decentralization of authority is necessary? Simply put, the idea of decentralized authority is that a person, that set of government as close as it is to the people, will be in a better position to take those steps which are necessary for their benefit. Putting it simply, a government for, let's say, a government of state of Assam is more closer to the people of Assam, is more closer to the issues that the people of Assam are facing. As such, all decisions that they would take will be more in tune with the requirement of the people of Assam, as compared to if a government which is sitting in Delhi is taking all the decisions necessary to be taken for the people of Assam. What needs to be done then? There has to be some kind of decentralization of power that must happen. Decentralization from the power that was resting at the center. Some of these power needs to be given to the provinces. Provinces being closer to the people of their province will be in a better position in order to give them the governance that they require. Keeping that in mind, it was decided that some sort of decentralization needs to happen in the British India provinces, in the British India administration, and more powers would be given to the provinces in order to administer those subjects which are more in tune with the local demand of the people. I hope this point is absolutely clear. The time and manner towards goal of responsible government will be decided by British Parliament. So essentially what we are trying to say is that on one hand, Britishers said that, well, we are telling you in our preamble of Government of India 1919 that we are looking to decentralize more. We are looking to move to a model which can be called as responsible government. But how exactly will we do so? What exactly will be the manner in which we will be moving from today's centralized model to a decentralized model? The time and manner will be decided by us. You cannot force us to give us some deadline. You cannot give us some time frame in which we need to do so. It will be up to the wisdom of the British Parliament to decide the time and manner in which decentralization of the powers will be done, in which the idea of creating a responsible government is being met. I hope this point is clear. Partially responsibility in provinces, but no change in character for central government. So essentially, one of the things that had happened in Government of India in 1990 was the fact that partial responsibilities in provinces were given, but by and large, the character of central government remained the same. We will now understand it one by one. So the first important thing that we need to keep in mind here is that diarchy was introduced for the first time in Government of India at 1919. Diarchy is different from bicameralism. Bicameralism means that there will be two houses in order to take legislative measures. Diarchy means division of subjects into two categories. What exactly do we mean by diarchy here? Let's try to understand. So the first thing that we need to understand here is that Government of India at 1919 had created subjects which were to be managed exclusively by the center and which had to be managed exclusively by the provinces. Thus, the subjects were divided into central subjects and provincial subjects. I hope this point one is clear. Then what happened? The central subjects included all subjects directly administered by the Government of India or with extra provincial interests were dominant. So the whole idea is that the first thing the government of Britishers in India decided that we need to bring about decentralization. How exactly can we do so? As I just explained, the idea is to give more powers to the provinces to administer on those matters which are closer to their provinces, which are unique to their provinces, right? So what was decided? Let's do this. We will divide the subjects of power, the subjects in which the administration must happen, into two categories. The first will be of the central subjects, that is to be managed by the central government. The second would be provincial subjects, that is to be managed by the provincial government. What exactly will be the nature of all the subjects that are being put in this category? This will be that subject, that set of subjects which pertains to Government of India, decisions that Government of India would need to take in order to have a uniform policy base across British India territories. Second, with respect to extra provincial interests. For example, if British India province were to negotiate with some of the princely states, some of the kings, local kings, or for that matter with other foreign countries, the idea of having that power will be limited only to central government. That is, it cannot be the provinces who can negotiate with other kings on certain matters. It will always be the central government who will have the power to negotiate with other kings, that is, local kings. The provincial subjects included subjects in which the interests of the provinces essentially predominated. As I just explained, the whole idea was that those matters which are closer to the people of the provinces need to be administered by the province itself, and that kind of subjects were being put in provincial subjects. The hierarchy was for provincial government. The provincial subjects were divided into two categories, reserved and transferred. This is where diarchy comes about. What is diarchy? Diarchy essentially means what we will do is to divide subjects into two categories. The subjects that has been divided into two categories will be called as transferred subjects and reserved subjects. What exactly are transferred subjects? Those subjects where the council, the ministers, can actually take a call on policy decision. What will be reserved subjects? Those subjects which will be dealt exclusively by the governor of the province will be called as reserved subjects. Let me explain it further and make it very simple. Let's try to understand everything in a perspective. So now what exactly is happening? First, Britishers decided that we need to bring about an idea of decentralization. How exactly were they doing so? They decided, let's do this. Let's create two sets of subjects. One subject will be containing those subjects on which the central government will have exclusive authority. And second subject, called the provincial subjects, will be those subjects where provinces can actually deliberate on issues and take decisions at their end itself. Idea is more power is now being given to provincial subjects, more so in those areas which pertains to issues of that province, right? Now we come to provincial government. In provincial government, there are provincial subjects. Even these provincial subjects were then divided into two categories. This division of provincial subjects into two categories, that is transferred subject and reserved subject, is what we call as diarchy. What exactly is the logic behind it? The whole idea is that while we would want the reserved subjects to be there, that is subjects that exclusively will be dealt by the governor with his own council, we would also want some subjects which needs to be transferred, that is subjects where the ministers, the Indians, can actually deliberate on and take actions on. These were called transferred subjects. I hope this point is now absolutely clear and there is no scope for confusion. The reserved subjects were kept with the governor and transferred subjects were kept with governor acting with the Indian ministers. So diarchy was a gradual transition from irresponsible to responsible government. One can very well argue it. Why? For the simple reason, the whole idea is that we are able to include ministers, we are able to include those people who are taking decisions on these subjects that have been elected by the people themselves. This is what we call as responsible government. What exactly is happening? So there are provincial subjects. One category has been kept as transferred subjects. The whole idea of transferred subject is these are those subjects where you can deliberate and you can take decisions on. Thus, there is a gradual shift from irresponsible to responsible government. The elements of responsibility was as follows. The matter and control of the reserved subject were made responsible to the British Parliament through Secretary of State. And secondly, the minister who controlled the transferred subject were made responsible through the legislative councils to an Indian electorate. exactly the point which I explained. How exactly responsibility is happening? Responsibility is happening because we are giving more powers, more subjects on which Indian electorate can actually be a part of. Indian electorate will elect their representative. These representatives will have the power to take decisions on transferred subjects. While with respect to reserved subject, these reserved subjects, whatever decisions that are being taken, it will be made responsible to British Parliament, because British Parliament can always ask questions with respect to policy decisions on any of the reserved subject. I hope now you are able to understand what exactly was the model which Britishers were following in order to move from irresponsible to responsible government. Now students, this point, diarchy was a gradual transition from irresponsible to responsible government, may very well be a question that might get asked in your mains examination. They might just give you the statement and they may say, please comment, do you agree, so on and so forth. And the analysis which we just studied here will be at the crux of this answer. As such, this point is also necessary for your main standpoint. Now, coming to the next important provision of Government of India Act 1919 AD, Governor General's Executive Council. What exactly was Governor General's Executive Council? There was a provision that was made which included 3 Indians and the 6-member Council of Governor General. The first thing that happened was that Governor General Council was increased. It was increased and a caveat was put. What exactly was the caveat? What exactly was the condition? That in the 6-member Governor General Council, at least 3 Indians will be there. What is the logic? That now whenever Governor General is taking decisions with respect to India, it would always be hearing the opinion of 3 of the members who are Indians. As such, there is again an element of responsible government. Indian councillors were entrusted with only some unimportant department. So you can understand the whole idea was to kind of give this gimmick, idea that you are important to us. But in effect, what we see that these Indian councils and councillors were actually given very less power. They weren't given very important departments, and they just used to take care of some very menial or unimportant departments. So now we come to the another important aspect, that is central legislature. What exactly does Government of India Act 1919 say about central legislature? The first thing is, via the Government of India Act 1919, a bicameral legislature was set up at the center. That is, 2 houses were set up at the center. Bicameral legislation means that there will be 2 houses. That is called as parliament. Today, when we talk about India, we know there are 2 houses at the parliament. One is Lok Sabha, other is Rajya Sabha. In Government of India Act 1919, bicameral legislature was brought about at the center, and there were 2 houses, Legislative Assembly and Council of State. Now students, you should not get confused between bicameral legislature with that of diarchy. What is diarchy? Diarchy simply means division of the subjects on which administration needs to be done into 2 categories. One that were called as transferred subjects, that were transferred to the Indian ministers to deliberate or and take decisions on, and the other were called reserved subjects that will be under the exclusive authority of governor and the council of the governor. On the other hand, bicameral legislature means that there will be 2 houses by which legislation will be passed. One will be the upper house and the other will be the lower house. So what all were the houses in the Government of India Act 1919? That at the center there will be bicameral legislature. First house will be called Legislative Assembly. Today we call it as Lok Sabha, and Council of State. It was primitive model of India's Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So this again is a very important point for your prelims examination, that it was Government of India Act 1919 which brought about what? It brought about bicameral legislature at the center. Let's talk about Legislative Assembly, that is the lower house. Legislative Assembly was the lower house with 3 years as its tenure. This 3 years again is very important for us to remember that the tenure of Legislative Assembly was 3 years, right? Number 1. It had 145 members, 41 were nominated while 104 were elected. Another important point that you need to keep in mind, that there were 145 members and 41 were nominated, 104 were elected. Who exactly were these 41 nominated members? These 41 nominated members included 26 officials and 15 non-officials. So what do we see? That these nominated members were still having official majority, as 26 officials were there, while 15 non-official members were there. Who exactly used to nominate these? It was the power of Governor General. Governor General was authorized to nominate these 41 nominated members. Who among them can the Governor General nominate these 41 members? He can nominate them from Anglo-Indian, from Indian Christians, or Labour. So the idea was that the Governor General is able to bring about representation of these people in the Legislative Assembly at the centre. The elected member included 52 general members, 30 Muslims, 9 Europeans, 7 landlords, 4 representatives of India community, and 2 Sikhs. Now, this is not a point that you would need to keep in mind, but the whole idea of including it here is so that you understand that essentially everything, every person could have a representation over there. So they had created a system where it was absolutely clear as to how many seats needs to be given to which community, right? Then we come to Council of State. What exactly have we understood? We have understood Legislative Assembly, that is the present day lower house, and Council of State, which is the present day upper house. What exactly was Council of State? It was the upper house, number one. Number two, it had 60 members, of which 33 were elected and 27 were nominated. Out of these 33 elected members, 16 were general, 11 Muslim, 3 Europeans, 1 Sikh. Again, not something that you would need to keep in mind. The tenure of Council of State was 5 years. This is a very important point that you need to keep in mind, that the tenure that was given to Council of State was 5 years, unlike Legislative Assembly where the tenure was 3 years. This point is very important. Please keep it in mind. Now we come to another important aspect, and that is elections and franchise. So first thing that we need to understand is that Government of India Act 1919 had given only restricted franchise. That is, there was no universal franchise, there was no adult suffrage, there was no voting power for women. Women were not even given voting power in Government of India 1919 Act. So the franchise was restricted. It was not universal suffrage, or rather no adult suffrage, nor it was universal franchise. So what all are the other important provisions of Government of India Act 1919? Let's try to understand them one by one. The Act provided for establishment of Public Service Commission in India for the first time. So the Act had given that we need to establish Public Service Commission in India. This Act also made a provision that statutory commission would be set up at the end of 10 years, a point that we have already studied. What exactly was the logic? It was said in 1919 that the whole idea of creating this act is to bring about certain reforms, but we would also need to track how exactly are these reforms are manifesting. As such, it included that every after 10 years there will be a committee, a commission that will be set up, which would look into how exactly Government of India Act 1919 is working. What exactly was that commission? It was the Simons Commission, which got set up in 1927 AD. The communal representation was extended to 6 Europeans and Anglo-Indians. This again is very important for us to note. We have studied in Morley-Winter reforms that the communal electorate was actually extended only to Muslims, but in Government of India Act 1990, Britishers carried forward their idea of divided rule. They decided to bring more chasms within the community of India. As such, communal representation was extended to 6 Europeans and Anglo-Indians. Now we come to Government of India Act 1935. Government of India 1935 is one of the most important acts. The reason why it is very important is because around 50 to 60% of Indian Constitution that we see today is actually borrowed from Government of India Act 1935 in terms of the provisions that it entailed. The funny thing is that Government of India Act 1935 came about, but still it was not implemented. It never quite got executed in any sense. But when it came to Indian Constituent Assembly, who had to make a constitution, they had actually borrowed things from Government of India Act 1935, to which they were absolutely against at the time when this act had come about in 1935. So you see the funny side of it, that our constitution as we see today has borrowed so many provisions from this, but the same constituent members, the same constituent assembly who were at that time fighting for India's liberation were absolutely against Government of India Act. Anyways, The first point is that this Act 1935 was passed by British Parliament in August 1935, not very important for us to remember, but essentially it was the biggest act that was ever passed by the British Parliament for British India. It in fact had 10 schedules and 321 sections. What I'm trying to say here is this act was so big that it was then decided that it will be broken down into two acts, Government of India Act 1935 and Government of Burma Act 1935. So the first thing that you need to keep in mind here is that it was the biggest act that was ever passed by British Parliament for British India. Secondly, it was Government of India Act 1935 that got broken down into Government of India Act 1935 and Government of Burma Act 1935. Both these points can actually be a source of question in your prelims exam, so please keep it in mind. This act ended the system of diarchy that was introduced in Government of India Act 1919. We just studied about diarchy. What exactly was it? Division of subjects into two categories, transferred and reserved. Diarchy was introduced only in provincial governments in Government of India Act 1919. So it was ended in Government of India Act 1935. What exactly did it provide it for? It provided for the idea of Federation of India. What is Federation of India? It is pretty much similar to what we see today as the Union of India, which is a federal form of India's brand. What exactly does it mean? Essentially, what it means is that there will be a federation. Federation means the central government. Federation means that there are two levels of government, one at the center and second at the provincial government. And the powers will be very clearly laid down between them, and one cannot interfere with the powers of the other. Okay, so it provided for establishment of Federation of India, and that to be made up of provinces of British India and some or all the princely states, right? However, Federation never came into being. This again has been a point which has been asked in prelims exam. What exactly does it say? That on one hand, Government of India Act 1935 gave the idea of federation. It said that there will be two levels of governments. It said that the idea would be that one level of government cannot interfere on the subjects of the second level of government. But on the other hand, what we also see is that this federation never came into being as the required number of princely states who were supposed to join never joined it. Then let's talk about the important features of Government of India Act, and the first feature of course is All India Federation. So the Act had proposed that there will be an India Federation. What exactly will be this India Federation? It will have 11 provinces of British India. The British India was divided into provinces. So there were 11 provinces of British India that will be a part of Indian Federation. Second, 6 chief commissioners provinces. There were some provinces which were not very big but were very important in terms of strategic locations where they were. They had not the governors, but they had chief commissioners that used to administer the affairs over there. So these 6 chief commissioner provinces were also supposed to be part of this All India Federation. And then third, those princely states who might accede to the federation. So the whole idea was that princely states might actually decide that they want to join British India. So all those princely states which takes that decision to join India will also form the All India Federation. For princely states, the accession to the federation was voluntary. So it was not being forced upon them, because in 1858 that was decided that nothing of this sort will be forced on the Indian princely states. And the same idea was continued here, that we would want you to join the federation, but there is no force. You have to do it on voluntary basis. Joining the federation was compulsory for British provinces and chief commissioner provinces. So for British provinces and chief commissioner provinces, the idea of joining the federation was a compulsion. It was compulsory on their part. But with respect to Indian princes, as I just explained, it was voluntary. They may choose, they may not choose to join British India. Another interesting thing that had happened was that diarchy was now brought at the center. So previously it was at the provinces, but in this act, in Government of India Act 1935, diarchy was brought at the center. This again, students, can be a question that can be asked in your prelims exam, because there is a tendency on the part of examiner to confuse you. So they may say that diarchy was introduced for the first time in India in Government of India Act 1909, 1919, 1935. The answer is 1919. But if the question is diarchy at the center was first time introduced in India, the answer would be Government of India Act 1935. So you just need to keep an eye for these details. You should not let these easy questions go wrong. You just cannot afford that. Anyways, under this Act, the executive authority of the center was vested in the Governor General on behalf of the ground. The idea was that the executive authority will be exercised by Governor General. This is what it said in the Government of India Act 1935, and Governor General will of course be working on in the name of the Crown. What exactly is the meaning of diarchy? We have already studied. What it means is dividing the subjects into two categories, reserved and transferred. The same was done with respect to federal subjects. What are federal subjects? Those set of subjects on which the federal government, the central government, will have exclusive authority on. For these subjects, there was a division that was done. The division was reserved subjects and transferred subjects. This division is what we call as diarchy. This diarchy for the first time was introduced at the center in Government of India Act 1935 AD. The reserved list comprised of subjects such as administration of defense, external affairs, and matters related to tribal areas. So what all were the subjects that were included in reserve list? The subjects were defense, external affairs. Defense pertains to defense of the country, it pertains to national security. External affairs, there could be some decisions, some diplomatic steps that were being taken by British India with the princely states, or for that matter with other foreign countries. Those matters will also be kept under reserve list, and matters related to tribal areas. So the reason it was decided that tribal areas are those niche areas which needs to be protected, and that cannot be effectively done if this authority was given to provincial governments. Thus, it will be the federal government, it will be the government at the center who would need to ensure the safety, security of the tribal areas. There was also, one can also argue that because these tribal areas are witnessing all sorts of revolts that were happening and all sorts of protests that were coming from these tribal areas, it was decided that it should be the central government who is keeping an eye on any kind of revolt that may break out from these tribal areas. Anyways, these subjects were to be administered by Governor General in his discretion with the help of 3 councillors appointed by him. So the reserved list subjects will be administered by whom? Will be administered by Governor General, and Governor General will have a discretion with respect to it. He doesn't really have to ask, he doesn't need to take permission of the elected representatives. All he requires is his team of councillors. This team had 3 councillors, and Governor General had his prerogative with respect to taking decisions on these areas, that is reserve list. They were not responsible to the legislature, as I just explained. The administration of the transferred subject was to be done by Governor General on advice of Council of Ministers, who cannot exceed 10. So what exactly do we see? The idea of responsible government being extended here. What exactly is it saying? That at center, with respect to transferred subjects, Governor General will need to act in the aid and advice given by his Council of Ministers. These Council of Ministers cannot exceed 10. So there will be 10 or less Council of Ministers. These Council of Ministers will advise certain legislative steps, certain executive steps that needs to be taken, and Governor General would need to take those steps. But with respect to reserved subjects, Governor General can act at its discretion. He will only need to consult with his 3 councillors, and it is his prerogative as to how he seek to take decisions on matters on subjects under reserved list. The Council of Ministers had to command the confidence of legislature. However, the Governor General could act on contrary to the advice of Council of Ministers if any of his special responsibilities was involved in such act. Now, one caveat was very clearly put over there, one condition was set, that indeed Governor General is supposed to act under the aid and advice of Council of Ministers for the subjects that pertain to transferred subjects. But let's say there is a matter which is with respect to transferred subjects, and Council of Ministers has advised Governor General to act in a particular manner which may interfere with something that is called as special responsibilities. Then Governor General need not act on it. But exactly are these special responsibilities? Well, clearly it has not been defined in Government of India in 1935, but the idea, it seems, was that all those responsibilities that pertain to the first list, for example, the matter might be pertaining to the transferred subject, but the effect of that decision might affect any of the subject of the reserved subject, then we say that special responsibilities are getting interfered, so Governor General can refuse to act on it. Secondly, if the Crown has given some kind of decision or some kind of direction to the Governor General with respect to any matter, Governor General needs to act on it. If any of the advice which has been entered by the Council of Ministers is in contrary, is against the directions given by the Crown, that again will mean that his special responsibilities are getting affected. As such, what do we see? What we see is that the Governor General had the power to not go by the aid and advice of Council of Ministers on matters of transferred subjects. What exactly are we trying to say here? हम बहुत सिंपल चीज कह रहे हैं, हम बस इतना कह रहे हैं कि इवन दो डायरकी आ गई थी सेंटर के पास, सब्जेक्ट्स डिवाइड हो गए थे रिजर्व और ट्रांसफर्ड में. ट्रांसफर्ड के लिए ये भी कह दिया गया था कि काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स की एड एंड एडवाइस के बाद ही गवर्नर जनरल डिसीजन ले सकता है. इवन देन एक कंडीशन वहां पे भी रख दी गई कि जो स्पेशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज होगी गवर्नर जनरल की, उसको कॉम्प्रोमाइज करते हुए उसको ट्रांसफर्ड सब्जेक्ट के डिसीजंस नहीं लेने हैं. वो स्पेशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज क्या होंगी? दैट कुड बी टू फोल्ड. One, if there is a directive which has been issued by the crown, अगर कोई डायरेक्टिव क्राउन दैट इज राजा ने या फिर क्वीन ने इशू किया है इंग्लैंड से, उसकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है कि उसको एग्जीक्यूट करे. और सेकंड, अगर कोई भी ट्रांसफर सब्जेक्ट के बारे में डिसीजन का इफेक्ट ये होगा कि जो रिजर्व सब्जेक्ट है उसमें एक किसी भी तरह से कोई कॉम्प्लिकेशंस आ रही है या कोई इफेक्ट आ रहा है, वहां पे भी स्पेशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी के क्लॉज को वो इन्वोक कर सकता है और वो उस डिसीजन को लेने से मना कर सकता है जो काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स वो कर रहे हैं, उसको एडवाइस कर रहे हैं. However, in that case, when an act involves special responsibilities, Governor General would work under the control and direction of Secretary of State. अगर मान लेते हैं कि ऐसी बात आ रही है that special responsibilities are being talked about, a decision needs to be taken with respect to special responsibilities. In such cases, the Governor General was expected to work under the control and direction of Secretary of State. I hope this point is absolutely clear. Now, another important thing that happened was bicameralism in provinces. So what exactly do we see? That there are now two houses in every province, and these two houses will take the job of legislature over there. It introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. So not all the provinces, but 6 out of 11 provinces. Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam and United Province were made bicameral. Again, bicameralism means having two houses to legislate, while diarchy means having subjects divided into two categories, transferred and reserved. Another very important point that must be kept in mind, that it was Government of India Act 1935 which gave the provision for establishment of Reserve Bank of India. Another important point that must be kept in mind, this question has actually been asked in prelims on several occasions. This is a very popular question for PCS examination. This is even a very important question for your banking exam. So from all angles, please keep it in mind that it was Government of India Act 1935 which provided for establishment of Reserve Bank of India to control currency and credit of the country. Another important point, that it was Government of India Act 1935 which provided for establishment of what? Federal Public Service Commission, which we today call as Union Public Service Commission, Provincial Public Service Commission, that is State PCS is what we call as, and then Joint Public Service Commission for two or more provinces. So there's a Public Service Commission that needs to be created, a common service Public Service Commission that needs to be created for two or more provinces. It will be called as Joint Public Service Commission. Again, a point which you know is still in play with respect to our constitution work. We have UPSC, we have State PCS, and we also have Joint Public Service Commission. One can very well say that it was borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. Other things that can be kept in mind here is that it had provided for establishment of federal code which got set up in 1937. What exactly was the logic of having this federal code? The federal code was established because for the first time the idea of having federation was being talked about, was being discussed about. Thus, What can happen? There could always be conflict between the provinces and the center with respect to their powers. Provinces might feel some issue comes within the subject which has been reserved for provinces, while the center may see that no, these set of subjects actually come under our authority, under the authority of the center. Hence, the idea of dispute is always there. In order to not let that happen, it was decided that there has to be a federal court which will deliberate on these issues. अगर हम आज की बात करें, exactly यही provision Supreme Court of India करता है. That is, if there is an issue with respect to the interpretation of the subject, interpretation of the matter as to it falls in which subject, a central-list subject or a state-list subject, it will be the Supreme Court which will go into the interpretation and take the final call. वही चीज स्टार्ट हुई थी 1935 में, जब इस चीज को समझा गया था कि क्योंकि अब एक ऐसा सिस्टम आ गया है जहां पे दो सेट ऑफ गवर्नमेंट्स होगी, एक सेंटर पे एक स्टेट पे. इट में वेरी वेल भी कि जो सब्जेक्ट जो इनको डिलिनेट किए गए उस पर डिस्प्यूट्स हो. इस डिस्प्यूट को रिजॉल्व करने के लिए एक फेडरल कोर्ट की जरूरत होगी और ये फेडरल कोर्ट बना 1937 में. Another important point to note, we know that Simon Commission had promised a dominion status, but 1935 Government of India Act never conferred this dominion status to India, right? So students, in this module, what exactly have we studied? We have studied about Government of India Act 1919 AD. We have studied about how Government of India Act came about, what all were the provisions. We also studied about Government of India Act 1935 AD, an act which was the biggest act which was ever passed by British Parliament for British India. And second, it actually became the crux from which the Constitution or the Constituent Assembly borrowed a lot of provisions from. And today, a lot of Constitution that we see today has been borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. This is all we had for this module, for this session. For more such videos, please log on to scholar.com. Thank you.